Just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to SiDEBAR Forever. If you like the show, please subscribe to us at sidebarforever.com, as well as share episodes of the podcast on your social media. That way, new listeners can find us as well. To consider writer Alan Moore to be the greatest of all time isn't exactly a hot take, but is it true? Moore's impact on comics is undeniable. He's had multiple peaks across his career timeline, and even though he hasn't made very many comics in, the last 10 years, if you look back at his CV, he remains utterly peerless. Marvelman, V for Vendetta, Swamp Thing, Watchmen, Batman, The Killing Joke, and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And not to mention his work on Spawn, as well as writing Jim Lee's Wildcats and creating America's Best Comics under the Wildstorm imprint. What is it about Moore's ideas and writing that resonates so deeply with comic fans? Who are some of the writers who have followed in his narrative footsteps? And what if Alan Moore had been born 20 years earlier and got the chance to collaborate with the likes of a Steve Ditko, an Alex Toth, a Neil Adams, or Bernie Wrightson? I'm Adrian Johnson. Swain has asked for his name to be removed from this episode. He wants no part of it. Me? I'll take the check on a topic we're calling, If Alan Moore Ain't the GOAT, Nobody Is.
Yourself being younger than I am and coming into comics in the 90s, what was the first Alan Moore thing that you read and were like, oh, wow?
Well, I can tell you off rip, when I first got into comics, it was almost thrust upon you, even in such a place as Wizard, you know what I'm saying? Which is where I got all my comic news.
Right.
Even in there, you would still get a smattering of, hey, Alan Moore, this guy is the guy, you know what I'm saying? So they would always recommend stuff like Watchmen, V for Vendetta, even in those pages, But being that it was in the early 90s, this would have been like 93, 94 when I was starting to get into it. This was around the time that Moore was actually starting to write a lot for Image. You know what I'm saying? So outside of the stuff that was recommended that you should read, I was reading, like that issue that he did of Spawn, like Spawn number 8. I don't think that was the first thing I read of Alan Moore, but it might have been amongst the first that I can truly recall. Like, oh, okay, this is that guy they were talking about in the magazine. Got you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll make an admission as well. This will show my age and my mentality at the time.
Oh, here we go.
You probably know exactly what I'm about to say. Okay. So when I first got Watchmen, I was like, oh, okay, they keep recommending it. And at the time I was like maybe 15. So this would have been 95. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, okay, I'm finally going to go ahead and I'm going to get this Watchmen paperback. Fine. Okay. Man, I read through that. It didn't hit me. It really didn't. I was like, huh? God, I was like, man, this is boring. What the hell? What? And then like I read V for Vendetta. I was like, what? This don't even, no, man, this ain't no. Like, it just wasn't hitting, you know what I'm saying? But it took me actually a couple more years. Maybe, I obviously had to mature, but, it wasn't until like I was 18 or 19 where I was like, now it's hitting. Yeah, now I can appreciate what he's doing. And I think that correlates with me also getting more involved with comics as well, and having ever burgeoning birth of books to have read from and say, okay, now I get it.
Yeah. And also probably too, coming in and during the 90s, coming in during that Image era, quote Image era.
Yeah.
And then probably as you got a little older is when you started doing more reading, like going into back issues and things from the 80s and even perhaps the 70s.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. To call him the GOAT, and really, if I'm to be honest, I think the whole idea of calling Alan Moore the GOAT goes back to Jason Wood at that Heroes Con.
That sounds like something Wood would say. Woodrow. Yeah.
Yeah. Woodrow, yo. Jason Wood. I recorded just real, like, kind of quick and dirty a podcast, and it was him and some other folks, and we were all in a room together.
That's right.
And he made mention. He said, "Yeah, I would consider Alan Moore to be the GOAT," and he said he would stand by that.
Yeah.
And he went unchallenged.
Nobody, everybody was up there to the side like coughing.
Right.
Yeah. I can't say nothing.
It wasn't one of those, like, in a wedding where they say if anybody has, reason to, disagree with this union. Nah, nobody had a word to say. It was crickets. It was crickets, but
yeah.
But he's considered a hippie weirdo, and that's true. I mean, it is. What?
Dang, yo, how you really feel?
Well, I mean, he is. He believes in magic, and he's been called like a crank and a grump, and those things are kind of true too. But, alongside that, he is also, and I mean, it's, these words get thrown around a lot. It's very, very rare in a very exclusive group where you could actually say creative genius.
Certainly. Oh, yeah.
And I think you have to say that with him. He's an innovator. He is a man of principle to great extent. And he is the most literate and provocative comic book writer ever.
Yes, and if I could also add, I think even at the base of all of that, speaking of literature, he also really has a love of language, of the written word, and that's coupled with, underneath all of, the being noted as a crank and everything as the years have progressed, he still had at that time a love for just an underlying love for comics, for the graphic medium. Graphic storytelling. Mm-hmm. And you can sense that in the choices that he made of the type of books that he would write. As we'll probably talk about later in the episode, when you look at his entire bibliography, it's very expansive. He wrote some of everything. And he just gave it that touch of, literacy coupled with that love of, graphic storytelling, and brought it together to make something truly special. You know what I'm saying? So word. Yeah, definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah, man. And to buttress that, there's a quote from Howard Chaykin, and he says, simply put, Alan Moore is the best writer American comic books have ever had since Harvey Kurtzman. Mm-hmm. And since, in my opinion, Harvey was the best writer comics have ever seen. That's high praise. And I think that probably prior to like Watchmen, probably prior to, some of the other stuff that he did, Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
Like the thing that I was the most blown away by as a whole story was probably Mouse.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That was the one thing where I read that, and maybe A Contract with God, where I was like, wow, comics really can be something more than, just 4-color teenage boys power fantasies and, ridiculous team ups and and all the things that made the comics of the 70s and 80s great and fun.
Yeah.
And a joyride that they were, but it could really be something more than that, and not more than that like above it, but more than that like you can do more with it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In that sense. But so the GOAT, the greatest of all time, I was thinking about this.
Yeah.
And I think it's always fun to kind of talk about these things and to debate them. Not that you and I are going to debate them, because I think we're in concert as far as our opinion of Moore as the greatest of all time.
Sure, yeah.
But I think one easy way to, because you need like an operational definition. You need like something to compare it to. And, if you only stay within comics or, comic related things, then it's kind of hard to say, oh, what about Jack Kirby? Or what about, this person, or what about, that person? And certainly, Kirby and Stan Lee, being, the forerunners to, to what we all have now, but, or the innovators, to what we all have now.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about more like Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, he's known as the greatest. He was known as the greatest while he was alive, in the same way that Moore is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing about it is, he was excellent at his craft,
Mm-hmm.
was recognized, for his excellence. There were many, many boxers that came after Muhammad Ali who followed in his footsteps, who took things that he did and tried to be like him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He had acolytes, he had followers. He had an impact outside of his industry. And then also Muhammad Ali had, like Moore, he had multiple peaks on his timeline. He had a rise here, and then he kind of went down a little bit. Then he had a second rise, and then like a third rise. And also, like Ali, Ali was a man of principle, and Moore is a man of principle.
Yeah.
He's a person who says, right is right and wrong is wrong. Now, granted, everybody's somebody's asshole, and we can all find things, to fault him. But that would be the comparison that I would make, in that, Moore has done undeniably great work, has been recognized for it. He is adored by his peers.
Yeah.
And by those, he has followers, and he has people who have followed in his footsteps, people who point to him as an influence, even if you can't see it directly in their work. He's had those multiple peaks on his career timeline.
Yeah.
Where you're like, well, by the time you get to Extraordinary Gentleman, you're thinking, okay, he can't be doing it again. And he's like, yeah, motherfucker, I'm doing it again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in terms of his principle, I mean, he was so done with, with DC Comics, and he was so done with really American comics, and he was so done with the movie business and having felt, shit on, that he said, look, I'm not going to take any of the money. Give the money to the artists that I worked with on these original comics. Give it to David Lloyd.
Mm-hmm.
Give it to Dave Gibbons. If they ever do Marvelman, I guess give it to, was it Gary Leach?
Yeah, Gary Leach, Alan Davis. Yeah.
Give it to Gary Leach and Alan Davis. So he's principled in the same way that Ali was. Ali gave up his crown, based on his principles. So to me, that's kind of how you would make the comparison. How would you try to sum him up as the greatest of all time? What has he done to earn that title in your mind? Just, and this is off the top.
Sure, absolutely. He's the GOAT quite simply because he is a writer foremost. Just, he can put his touch to anything, any IP, any character, be it original or something that is a corporate character, and still find a way to make it interesting. I mentioned at the top of the episode, when I was coming into comics, in the early 90s, that was during a period where he was starting to write stuff, for a couple of the Image guys like Todd McFarlane, and then a few years later for Jim Lee at Wildstorm, and even those characters who seemingly, even though I loved them at the time, looking back upon reflection, they were kind of ciphers in a way, and he came in, and particularly for Wildcats, he established a whole continuity, for them. And he was able to find the essence of whatever character that he took on and, somehow create a whole mythology for it. And it was up to the copyright holders or whoever owned that character after he was done, if they wanted to do something with that. And a lot of times, if they were smart, they would keep on to that continuity that he established. Unfortunately, Wildstorm did not. Like, he came on and he did about 12 issues and turned Wildcats into like this epic saga. You know what I'm saying? And what did they do after he was done with Wildcats? Gee, thanks. Appreciate it. Never touched that again. Never did anything else with that story, which is a damn shame, Mm-hmm. He's one of those creators to where he has that touch. He has it. whatever story that you read from him, it's unmistakably Alan Moore. You know what I'm saying? And there are very few people that you can say that about. Now, you can say that they touched a certain story for sure, but to one where you're just like, you're guaranteed at least once or twice reading a certain issue by Alan Moore to just kind of have one of those moments where you're reading and you come across a turn of phrase, you got to put the book down for a second and just be like,
yeah,
oh, you know how like you might be listening to like some rap song, right? And,
yes, I was just about to make that comparison. Yeah. Go ahead.
Like you listening to a verse by 3 Stacks, right? And it come across your ear, you're like, oh shit, hold on. And you gotta stop it and rewind that, you know what I mean? Just to hear it again and again and again, just to like take it all in. That's how it is with Alan Moore. You know, it's always a turn of phrase, or when you get to the conclusion of a story, you know, it's just like, damn, he did that.
Yes.
And you felt like you're leaving with something more than you had before you started reading it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I same thing with that Superman story from the Superman Annual. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah.
For the Man Who Has Everything. Now, I read that after I saw the animated adaptation that Bruce Timm and Warner Brothers did.
Ah, okay.
I saw it first in the animated version in the 90s. It was like, you know, and I'm watching it and I'm like, God damn. You know, because it was so moving. And, you know, this is someone who as a kid, you know, and I've recounted this, you know, many times on the show, but you know, I've devoured tons and tons of Superman, you know, every Kurt Swan story ever, you know, just every Superman, all of it. So, you know, to surprise me with the Superman story was pretty much a feat. Mm-hmm. And yet, you know, here and again, this is someone who's thinking about character, who's thinking about the character, the limitations of the character. Well, he's Superman. He can do anything, but he has limitations. He has limitations. What are those? And those things are just as interesting as, you know, the laser beams coming out of his eyes and flying and super strength and, you know, and all, you know, super cold breath, you know, and all these other, you know, dopey things that we love about Superman.
Yeah.
So for sure, that's definitely it for me. I didn't read, you know, the Wildcats and Spawn, although I was aware of it. No, I take that back. I think I did read one or two issues of Jim Lee's Wildcats. For the year he did it. He did it for about a year, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I do remember reading some of it. And oddly enough, you know, Moore has been quoted as saying that when he started writing that stuff, and Spawn probably too, he said he wanted to write stories for a very sophisticated 13 or 15-year-old.
Well, I can tell you that he hit the mark. He absolutely did. Yes. By experience, yes.
Yes. He and not punching down while doing it. You know what I mean? Like not stooping, you know, to the audience per se, but just saying, okay, you know, what would be interesting to somebody who has, you know, a 13 or 15-year-old, let's say a boy like yourself, you know, with all this testosterone raging through your body and, you know, and you know, you're turned on by the four-color goodness of, you know, Spawn and Wildcats and, you know, and Gen 13 and, you know, and Savage Dragon, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, that these are the things that you're interested in. But I agree with you, man. I think that his handling of character and the writing and the literacy of it, I was truly blown away by you know, his run on Swamp Thing. Mm-hmm. Because again, you know, he's thinking about this as, okay, no, this isn't a man who thinks he's a plant. This is a plant who thinks he's a man.
Correct. Yes.
And it totally turns the character on its head, and it totally opens you up as the reader to, okay, wait a minute. Because, you know, everything in comics had always been this outside thing changes this human being, but they're still a human being. Mm-hmm. And they still have their goodness and their morality and their ethics and their all of that, their stand uprightness or whatever, they still have all of those things intact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that he's not a human anymore, how does that change him? How does that change his engagement with the world? How does that change the character of his affection for, what was his wife's name?
Abby. I think it was Abby.
Abby, yeah.
Abigail,
for Abby. Yeah, and other human beings. So anyway, it was just fascinating. And I remember as a not 16, I was probably 18.
Okay.
And I remember going to Titans down off of Riverdale Road.
Yes, sir.
And Pat, this was the first Titans, the only Titans at the time. And Pat said, man, you got to read this Swamp Thing. And I'm like, Swamp Thing?
You mean that Bernie Wrightson joint? What?
Yeah, I was not, man, I hadn't messed with Swamp Thing since Wrightson and Wing.
Yeah.
And it was fire, you know. But, and I believe, of course, this was after the really terrible Swamp Thing movie with Adrienne Barbeau.
Hey, I like that joint, but go ahead.
Hey, man, all right, man.
For obvious reasons, but go ahead.
Yeah, man. Hey, man, it's Adrienne Barbeau, yo. You still have some leftover Escape from New York in you. But I remember him saying, he was like, yeah, he says, see that? He says, he's growing sweet potatoes on his skin. And I'm like, what? And then you find out some of it is, it's hallucinogenic. It's like, it's like peyote or LSD or some kind of a natural mushroom.
Yeah.
That, people eat it and they get a psychedelic trip off of it. And I'm like, wow. So, and I have no idea how long he actually worked on Swamp Thing. I can't remember. Do you know?
Yeah. He worked on it from issue number 20, which was, I believe, in 1982. Yeah, because it came out shortly around the time of, right after the Swamp Thing movie. So that would have been 82. And he worked on it to about issue number 64, thereabouts. So you're talking maybe about 4 years?
Okay.
A little bit over 4 or 5 years? Yeah.
And that's got to be his longest run on pretty much any one thing, right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, so, after Swamp Thing, and then just prior to Watchmen was when I realized this was the same guy who wrote Marvelman and wrote V for Vendetta. And I was a big Marvelman fan, again, thanks to Don Hillsman, and I was just like, again, and he did the same thing on Marvelman that he kind of did with Watchmen. He took these, in Watchmen, he took like, kind of Golden Age, Bronze Age characters. By the time they got to Charlton, they were Bronze Age, essentially. Mm-hmm. And then just like you said, created ciphers, created analogs for these characters. And Marvelman was kind of the same way. It's this Golden Age, goofy Golden Age character created by, Michelangelo, I think was the...
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The cartoonist's name. And brought him into the modern era and did the same thing he kind of did with Watchmen. It's like, okay, well, what would happen if a super being actually truly existed? And I loved Marvelman. I loved Warrior Magazine. I loved all of those stories. I just thought they were super interesting, and and then the artwork is in black and white, which was a thing that I was really drawn to at the time. You could have black and white magazines like the Star-Lord oversized book, or Creepy and Eerie, or just there were all kinds of examples of black and white comics. Star Reach. Back in the 80s, but I loved it, and so that's when I kind of put two and two together. Okay, this is the same guy. So even then, by the time Watchmen came out, and I consider myself, and probably Dwight as well, and Don, and even our other friend Mike Daly, I consider myself fortunate because I would catch the whatever it was Oglethorpe bus and ride from East Point up to Buckhead, to the Peachtree Battle Shopping Center, and go to Oxford, and every month or however frequently it was coming out, I guess it was monthly, and buy the next issue of Watchmen. So in real time, we saw, this thing that we'd never seen before, this epic odyssey that we had never experienced before in American comics, month to month come out in real time, and have a sense that shit was changing. The game was changing.
Yeah.
But when did you get to Watchmen? I know we've covered this as well probably on our Watchmen episode, but when did you get to Watchmen, man?
Yeah, I got to it I'd say probably. Well, I noted that first.
Well, you said you were a teenager, right? You like 15?
Yeah, I first tried to read it when I was 15. I was like, man, no. But it really didn't hit me until like I was about 18 or 19. You know, like you intimated, you know, after I'd read more comics in a wider expanse of material, to where it's like, okay, and probably matured a little bit as far as like my taste as well, that I was like, yeah. And, you know, it's also one of those things to where when you read some of the pieces of the script that Moore provided to, you know, Dave Gibbons, you know, Alan Moore's scripts are legendary for their thickness and size, you know, because he's very descriptive in terms of what he wants and within each panel. But you will hear every artist say, you know, Alan is very descriptive. He gives you these thick scripts, but they never feel overbearing. He feels like he's giving you enough description so that you can have a vision in your head to get down onto the paper, but still have yourself come through, you know, with it. And he's not really asking for anything that's impossible, even though, you know, the product that comes out is just like, what kind of mind would this come from? I mean, this is glorious. This is fantastic. And that's no hyperbole. It really is not.
Yeah.
When you're reading Watchmen and you're just like, man, not only is this scripted so perfectly, but it takes a certain caliber of artist to interpret that scripting and to come out with the graphic representation of it to match the gloriousness of that scripting. And both of those things together just equals something that's just unforgettable. You know what I'm saying? Like, God, fearful symmetry. Who would even attempt that today?
Right.
And have it make sense, not be a gimmick. The way he did it, it wasn't a gimmick. Like, yeah, it's a part of the storytelling, you know? And then the way that the story itself kind of weaves back on itself, but then comes back to the present, and it all makes sense. You know what I mean? It's just a thing of sheer beauty. Seriously, yeah.
Yeah. I think you called it the Colossus of Rhodes, man.
Yes, it is. It stands astride. it like I told you when we were texting back and forth beforehand. You know, Moore kind of stands astride of, you know, the literate part of comics, you know, and the graphic storytelling of comics. And somehow he's able to blend those two worlds, you know, very seamlessly to give you just this unforgettable experience for sure.
Yeah, you're right, man. You're right. The thing about, like, I guess Watchmen and really Marvelman, and obviously both of those works were kind of birthed out of, you know, his kind of growing up under Thatcherism and whatever that was for, you know, for people living in Britain.
Yeah.
You know, in that time. Clearly the forerunner to what he was doing with the deconstruction of the superhero, or examining it through a completely different lens than we had seen in the previous, you know, 25 years or so, you know, of the golden age of Marvel, and really, you know, comics becoming, you know, that second wave, that second guard, where fans of Julie Schwartz and fans of, you know, Carmine Infantino and Dick Giordano were starting to make comics. Fans of Stan Lee, and fans of Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were coming into comics and making comics. But Stan and Jack and Steve Ditko, but let's say Stan really, he really was the originator of this idea of, okay, the superhero is a real person, you know, behind the mask, and that person probably has problems. So, you know, Spider-Man, he's a nerd at school, he's getting picked on, you know, his parents are dead. He lives with his, you know, with his senior aged aunt and uncle. He can't get the girl, although he liked to get the girl, and he's never cool. But deep down in his heart, though, he is still a good person. The Fantastic Four, you know, they're kind of this kind of a weird foster family that's kind of jammed together under these circumstances. They don't always get along.
Yeah.
You know, the X-Men, you know, it's like, you know, they're outcasts. It's almost like an allegory for being, you know, for being a minority, or for, you know, being gay or something like that. You know, all these other things. They have problems, but they're all at their hearts good people. And it was Moore who came along and said, what if at their core they weren't good people?
Yeah.
What if some of them really were terribly selfish? Or some of them were violent? Or some of them were greedy? Or some of them were megalomaniacal and not in the mustache twisting way?
Right.
What if some of them were egomaniacs? What if some of them had sexual proclivities that interfered with them trying to go out and be this do-gooder? All these kinds of things. But I wanted to read something from an essay that Moore wrote back in 1983.
Okay.
Have you ever read it?
No. What's the title of it?
If I'm not mistaken, it was called Stan Lee, Don't Believe the Hype, a Friendly Character Assassination.
Oh,
something
wow.
like that.
Okay.
Something like that. But it's an excerpt from it, and he's talking about Stan Lee and talking about the influence that Stan Lee had on comics, obviously preceding him and the people that he collaborated with. And this was in 1983, so this is 3 years before Watchmen, probably right in the heart of Swamp Thing. So he says, this is a quote, he says, as Marvel began to grow into a bigger and bigger concern, Lee seemed to find most of his time taken up in the day-to-day editorial decisions, implicit in such a large enterprise, and less time available for actual writing. Other writers began to appear. Some of them, like Roy Thomas, were very competent indeed. Others were less so. The one thing that all of these newer writers had in common was that they had, by and large, cut their teeth upon the writing of Stan Lee. This was good in so much as it lent a pleasing continuity to the books, Roy Thomas following Stan Lee with a style very much like Lee's own, but bad in that we were getting a kind of Stan Lee once removed situation. It was sort of a watering down process. And he continues on, he says, eventually writers began to appear who had cut their teeth upon Roy Thomas, and the original idea was diluted still further. Writers who had less idea about plotting and characterization than a common earthworm came to believe that all one needed to write a good solid Stan Lee type story was to have Dr. Doom or Galactus turn up and the heroes to spend a couple of obligatory frames arguing amongst themselves.
Yes. Yeah. I can't argue with that. Yeah.
And, Moore essentially changes the game in 86 with Watchmen. And then we have, The Dark Knight Returns comes out. And after that, we have Batman Year One. And so everything is changing. And what's funny is those two works have influenced comics since.
Oh, yeah. It's in some ways, particularly in the case of Dark Knight Returns, to his detriment, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, just Watchmen, man. Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, those are the twin catalysts for this, what you would call this grim and gritty era. You know what I'm saying? The challenge became, it's like more, he, established that, hey, these characters, actually may have feet of clay. Their reaction to gaining these powers or going about doing their thing may actually be closer to what, a normal person would have with all the, like you said, with all the proclivities and, things that a normal person would have, coming into a circumstance like that. And you see in its wake of it and Dark Knight Returns that, it's the same thing as he described in that essay from 83. You have these writers who are the acolytes of those two twin works. And then you have writers a decade later who are acolytes of that. So it's like that whole cycle again of, okay, here you have a shift in paradigm in the medium. You have acolytes of that shift, and then you have acolytes of the shift of the shift. And it just becomes like, where's the next paradigm shift? You know what I'm saying? And it's like with Moore, it just kind of stops right there, and it shouldn't, but for a lot of people, it seems to. You know what I mean?
That was kind of what I was getting at when I saw this. I was like, okay, well, the same thing obviously happened to he and Frank Miller. Where the things that they created, there was a generation that was influenced by that, and some of them were peers. And then there was a generation after that were influenced by that previous generation. And then now we maybe get to modern day, to today. And so everything is watered down. And there are examples of that in every medium. I'm sure there are bargain basement, Clancy's out there in the novel writing, world. And,
Yeah.
Bargain basement, Grisham's and bargain basement, whomever's. It definitely happens in film. Tarantino comes along and everybody wants to do fast talking gangsters who know a lot about pop culture and who make references that nobody understands. We even talked about that a little bit on the episode that we recorded about Raiders of the Lost Ark, about the acolytes of Spielberg, the Spielberg Juniors, and then Spielberg Juniors.
Right.
So then you get, like, even now, even without directly referencing it, so much of this golden age of television and movies that we're experiencing and seeing now, so much of it still goes back to Alan Moore, which kind of gets back to the whole thing of the greatest and how much impact this one has, and even impact outside of their particular field.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't get The Boys. You don't get Jupiter's Legacy. You don't get a lot of the science fiction shows that we watch. You don't get Marvel's interpretation of Cloak and Dagger to a certain extent. The TV series they did, kind of without Watchmen. You don't get the Heroes TV show from 15 years ago. Umbrella Academy, the DC's Teen Titans TV show. I mean, there's just tons of examples of of TV and films that are reflecting that back to us, 35, 40 years later. And anyway, I think it's a testament to how staggeringly good, Moore's work has been. And then at the same time, how, like you said, no one took the cue of, okay, let me come up with an original idea. It just becomes a play off of what's been done before. And let's just ride this thing until the wheels fall off.
Yeah, and while I'm thinking about it, I'm glad you brought up that point, Swizz, because there's one work also that I think people keep going back to, and we all know how much DC's canon has evolved and rebooted over the years, like 4 or 5 damn reboots, right?
Right.
You know what's remained constant throughout all those reboots since 1988? The one thing that's remained constant, and again, this is to its detriment, because it makes no sense why this is still a thing. Batman the Killing Joke, okay? And the one thing within Batman the Killing Joke, the shooting of Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, by the Joker, okay? You probably know, as well as I do, far too many examples where, and at this point, I would almost call it lazy writing. I can distinctly remember there was an issue of, they had done a reboot of Brave and the Bold, like back in the late 2000s. And it was like, oh man, there's this one issue of Brave and Bold that was getting all this acclaim and everything, right? And it starred Batgirl in that issue. So I already had my eye open, like, they better not. They better not. No. And what happened was that somehow, if I remember the story correctly, Batgirl and whoever was the guest star with her in that particular issue, somehow they had the opportunity to go back and try to change something in the continuity, in the past or whatnot, in her past. And so the big reveal in all of this is there's this 2-page spread of, if you remember the scene from The Killing Joke, where Joker shows up at Barbara Gordon's apartment at the front door, has this revolver and shoots her, right? And he's wearing like this Hawaiian shirt, like he's going on vacation,
Right.
That was the big reveal in that issue. Like, oh, this 2-page spread of close-up of him wearing that same garb, shooting whatever version of Barbara Gordon it was. And I was like, come on. You mean to tell me the acclaim was just for that. And the other thing too is like, that's never changed. It's like DC is almost mandated, unofficially or not, you cannot change this. You cannot change Barbara Gordon getting shot by the Joker in this exact circumstance. Even still today, within this continuity, whatever continuity it is, you know, that has not changed. And I think part of it is a testament to how powerful that story was. It's a great Batman story, obviously. But it's also one of those things to where, again, acolytes of acolytes of acolytes of more. And that storytelling, that's all they took from it. You know, it's an easy shock moment to put that in your story and somehow say, oh, wow, isn't this brilliant? You know, and it's like, no. You're diluting the impact that it originally had in that original, presentation. You know what I mean?
You know, I always wondered, why did they continue that on, and why did they, like, it was a bummer for me. It's like, oh, Barbara Gordon's, now she's Oracle. Now she's in a wheelchair. It's like,
yeah,
what? Give her some bionic shit so she can walk. What are you doing?
Right.
But I don't know. I suppose so, man. And and the thing is, Moore as a writer, Frank Miller as a writer, they did take what had gone before them and try to build upon it. They were standing on the shoulders of giants.
Oh yeah.
But now the inverse has happened, like you're saying, with the acolytes of the acolytes and of the acolytes. There's a guy named John R. Parker. He wrote a piece for Comics Alliance back in 2015.
Okay.
And one of the things he says when writing all of his beloved works in a 5-year period, fairly early in his career, Moore wasn't attempting to capitalize on the latest trends. Mm-hmm. He saved that for his time with Image in the 90s. He was consciously experimenting, throwing out the rule book. It must have come as a great disappointment to the anarchists then that an impression of his approach became the rule book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, man, because, we didn't really talk about the Killing Joke earlier in our conversation. Was that something that when you got to it, you were like, oh, this has the greatness to it? Was that something that sat with you in that way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think probably because it's a bit more approachable than Watchmen or V for Vendetta in that it has Batman in it, for part of it, you know what I mean? So initially that's what got me. Even from that opening page, with the grid, of like Batman coming to Arkham in the rain. The Batmobile parks, he comes in wordless. Now, this is totally wordless now. And, Commissioner Gordon hands his coffee off to, the police officer, whomever standing next to him. And, without a word.
Was it like, Bullock? Yeah. It wasn't Bullock?
Not that time, yo. It's a beat cop, you know what I mean? And they just go in together, And just the little things once he goes inside and into the story. And again, it takes someone with an equally brilliant artistic sense to interpret what Moore is scripting. You cannot ask for that, anymore, inside of someone other than like, Brian Bolland for sure. That's brilliant. That's truly a feather in his cap. That's a masterwork right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I read it, it definitely hit me. It was like, wow, this is, I hate to say realistic, but we're talking about Batman. But to my adolescent mind, this was a realistic interpretation of Batman. It wasn't Brave and the Bold. It wasn't Jim Aparo. It wasn't whatever you want to name. It was like, okay, this has man, this is just crazy. And it was a Joker origin story as well. You know what I mean? Like it had everything wrapped up in it to where subsequent versions of the character have referred back to it. The Killing Joke spawned a lot of things that are present now in continuity. How this current Joker got, to be who he is. obviously the aforementioned shooting of Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. And I think that antagonistic relationship, obviously, between Batman and the Joker in terms of like, see, we can't exist. We can't exist without each other. You know, we're two sides of the same coin, you know, and there's that joke. I did not get it as a kid when I read it. And even now as an adult, I think it's just so absurdist, you know, where he's telling a joke about, you know, to Batman about, you know, shining a flashlight and someone's trying to walk across it or something with the beam or whatnot. And Batman, he kind of just breaks, you know, his stoic character and just kind of chuckles.
Yeah.
And they both kind of chuckle for a bit. And I love the way it ends. It ends how it began. You're looking at the puddles, right? The rain making puddles.
Right.
You see the headlights of the Batmobile after, you know, he carts Joker away and the lights of the Batmobile disappear. And we're ended with exactly how the first panel is. Drops of rain making puddles. Oh, just great, man. Just beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that perfect lyrical ending, that, you know, where it swoops back around and absolutely, man. And that was one that certainly hasn't been adapted for a live action Batman movie, but it was actually adapted for an animated movie that came out several years ago. And I kind of wanted to conclude the conversation in terms of Moore's greatness and, you know, and the comparison to Muhammad Ali in terms of, you know, his stance, you know, his pride, his ethical stance on, you know, in his dealings with DC, you know, post Watchmen and kind of what they did to him and Dave Gibbons. But also, and I'm trying to think when I first became aware of it, but I guess was the first adapted thing The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
Actually, no. Well, the one that made it to screen, yes. But I know that Watchmen had been optioned almost as soon as it finished, even as early as 1987, because there was supposed to be something that Terry Gilliam was supposed to do an adaptation that didn't get but so far. But yeah, as far as like an adaptation that was made to the screen, yeah, it would be League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Right, which was a dumpster fire. It was awful.
Yes.
It was absolutely awful. But I remember seeing that and I was like, God, this is a terrible movie. And I didn't realize that that it was a comic at the time because I wasn't reading a ton of comics at the time. So my connection to the comic world was a little bit thin at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this was based on a comic. And I remember I went and bought the graphic and I was like, holy shit, this is great.
Yes.
And then you again realize part of the reason why he was so mad is like, okay, you know, this thing turned into a piece of shit. But then also, and then after that, you know, you have V for Vendetta, I guess. And then after that, you have From Hell. And then eventually you get to HBO's Watchmen TV show.
Now, hold on. Don't skip over Zack Snyder's attempt at Watchmen, because...
Oh, yeah, I forgot about it. I was trying to forget about it.
I should have let Sleeping Dogs lie, dog. Damn.
They did that, yo? They did. Zack Snyder did that for real? Just for me to take a moment to just shit on Zack Snyder, I watched Army of the Dead.
Oh, no. Go ahead. Oh, no.
It's just like Watchmen. It's like, okay... The first 3, 4, 5 minutes is actually kind of entertaining because it's a montage of people killing zombies over a soundtrack.
Yeah.
But then he messes it up in the same way that he did in Watchmen. How are you going to do a Watchmen movie and the big climactic final scene in Antarctica or whatever at Ozymandias' his hideout, his lair?
Yeah.
You play all along the Watchtower,
like on the nose, like.
And so in Army of the Dead, they play this montage against leaving Las Vegas.
Oh, brother!
And Viva Las Vegas, and all this obvious shit. Where I'm just like, oh my God, you know, he's just not a deep guy, yo. That's probably the kindest thing I can say about him. He's just not a deep guy. But when is the first time that you became aware like in a public, Wizard magazine sense, that Alan Moore was like, okay, I don't want anything to do with these movies. Take my name off these movies. I don't want any money from these movies. You can give all the money that you were going to give me. You can give it to the artists who I worked on these books with, but I don't want anything from them. I'll have no parts of it. I'm done. When was the first time that you can recall being aware that he was taking that hard a stance?
I can recall, I was still working at the comic shop then. So this would have been like 2004, 2005. And, I think League of Extraordinary Gentlemen had come out by then, by at least 05 or whatnot. And there were articles in just, not just Wizard, but just in comics news, period, about, oh man, Alan Moore is upset as fuck over this movie. Like, he is just like, what the hell? Like, and then you eventually saw he actually went to court, over this, and just all this stuff was building up, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's around that time that people started, really ascribing to him the trait of, well, he's just being a grump. Any normal person would have just took the money and ran. You know what I'm saying? You can
right.
Just option whatever it is. I don't care. Just give me the option money. But like you said, he's a man of principle. You know what I'm saying? He's like, damn, take my name off of it or whatever. But, go ahead and pass that money along to, the co-creator who, really came up with the visuals for this. You know what I mean? And
right.
I think in some ways, although in others, he was kind of undeserving, of that, and it just became it started to become like a joke. It started almost to become like a Rob Liefeld type joke. Like, you mentioned,
I was just thinking the same thing. It's almost like if you needed a punching bag, I'll throw Rob Liefeld in. If you want to talk about somebody being grumpy and being wrong-headed about, their ethical stance or whatever, you throw Alan Moore's name in there. You're exactly right.
Yes. Yeah. So that almost became just the joke du jour, if you will, to say, oh man, stop being grumpy like Alan Moore, man. Shut the hell up. That type of thing. And it's just like, no, man, you don't hear about people within the creative field doing that a lot. Most people, and I would say most rational people would just say, well, they're paying me a bunch of money. I'll just take it and run. Damn the consequences. Who cares? But it's somebody like him who really cares about, not just that product itself, but there is a creative legacy that one leaves behind when they create a body of work like that. And to have, even though it's an adaptation of that particular chapter in your body of work made, and it's not of the best quality, that says something, you know what I mean? And it says something, whether it's unfair or not, fair or not, it still says something. It's almost like posterity would have it as a finger pointing back to you that you actually optioned them and let them do that shit.
Right.
That's what it is. Posterity will point back at you and say, you're the one who gave them the option in the first damn place. It's your fault.
Yeah. And one could probably say, hey, look, Alan Moore, you knew about Harlan Ellison's thing about pay the writer and what kind of trouble he had, working, in entertainment and having things be adapted. Although, Harlan Ellison had tons of things.
Yeah.
Adapted and move over into other mediums. But at the same time, you just can't argue with that, yo. It's like Mace walking away from Bad Boy, yo, at the height of shiny suitness, yo.
Yeah.
I mean, all the money in the world, all the popularity, all the champagne, all of the he's pushing the best whips. He's staying in the finest hotels. There's no super fine chick he hasn't smashed, and he walks away from all of that.
Cause someone wasn't right. Yeah.
Yes, something wasn't right. This isn't for me. And so you really do have to acknowledge it. I'm guessing, it was probably after the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen when I found out that he was, he's literally disowning, those films and and didn't want to have any parts of it. And at the time, I remember thinking, man, come on.
Right.
Like you said, just get paid, dog. But when you think about it and you do look back, again, his comic DB, his CV remains peerless.
Yeah. Come on now.
Peerless.
Yeah, yo, come on, man.
Like he was the shit before he even got to the shores of America.
Yeah.
And then just took it up a notch. So Heidi McDonald, the writer and editor over at The Beat, she had a thing that she wrote about Moore. She said, is Moore a high-maintenance creator? Absolutely. But you'll note that the main reason Diane Nelson, DC's current president, this is how many years ago this was given reign over the company is because she was so good at handling another very high-maintenance creator, J.K. Rowling. Would Warner Brothers treat J.K. Rowling the way DC treated Moore? I don't think so.
Hell no.
I don't think so.
And that's a damn shame, because to me, in terms of their respective impacts upon popular culture, it's very easy to say, J.K. Rowling, oh man, with just those books, what I'm saying, she made a huge impact. But I would say that Moore is the equal of that in many ways, as well, as far as his impact, what I'm saying, not just in comics, but even outside of comics, as you intimated, what I'm saying. But it's messed up that, yeah, they wouldn't treat them the same. In fact, they did Alan Moore dirty.
Yeah. Absolutely. And really, if you go back to the whole thing with DC and Watchmen and license, and the rights will revert back to you, that was really the beginning of the end in terms of him realizing that, these bigger, larger entities, publishers and movie studios, etc. I mean, they're just going to fuck you if they can.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And oddly enough, we had an episode here recently where we were talking about, paying Brubaker and Epting, for their contribution to the Winter Soldier and all that character has become on television and on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a quote from Ed Brubaker talking about, and this is probably, I should have gotten annotated the year, but I think this was around the time that they were doing the relaunch Watchmen comics with, Adam Hughes and Darwin Cook and Jay Lee and, all those folks.
Oh, before Watchmen. That's right.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. And Brubaker said this.
Mm-hmm.
The main problem I have with this whole thing is that the summer Watchmen was announced, talking about the comic, was the same summer that pros and fans rallied around Jack Kirby. It was the beginning of the Creator Bill of Rights and many other things. In that summer, DC touted Watchmen as a victory for creators' rights. They proclaimed that the creators would own it and have control, and that this was a new era, not like what happened to Siegel and Schuster, to Kirby, to countless comic creators that came before. They were saying DC was better than the other publishers by giving this deal to Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Now it turns out, still quoting Brubaker here, now it turns out that's not the case, and it's just like all the others that came before, and they're acting like they never said that.
Right. Yeah.
I don't care what's in the contract. I don't have any animosity for my friends and peers working on those books. And again, I'm presuming he's talking about the Watchmen series that came out here recently in the last, I think, 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
He says, and I totally understand why DC is doing it and that they have the right to. But I was there when they announced it, and I remember how they talked about it then. And say whatever you want about Marvel and Kirby, etc., but no one ever held up the Avengers as a victory for creators' rights.
Right.
So he's pointing out the hypocrisy of them saying, hey, we're going to do this great thing. And then when they realize that it's not even a great thing, this is like a world-changing thing. No, we got to keep that for ourselves.
Yeah. And, and even over the course of, after all of that happened, once Alan Moore was working with Jim Lee over at Wildstorm, and it was like that inexorable pull back towards DC that he did not want, because there were rumors happening, and they were finally confirmed when Jim Lee came out and said, yeah, I've sold Wildstorm to DC. And Alan Moore had started creating stuff for Wildstorm, and now that means that stuff is being subsumed back into the very company that he did not want to do business with. You know what I'm saying? And now all that stuff, all those America's Best comics, all of those are now DC Comics property. Damn, that's just fucked up.
It is, yo.
That's the best way I could say it. That's a bullshit. Damn.
And I think Jim Lee he flew over to England to talk with Moore directly and to try to tell him, hey, look, you won't have to interact with them at all, and blah, 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 and so on and so forth, and this, that, and the third. And basically, the only reason Alan Moore went forward with America's Best Comics was because there were so many other collaborators that he was working with that had already committed to it. If he abandoned it and said no go, it would affect them in a negative way.
Yeah.
So again, the principle of, hey, I don't want to mess this up for you guys. My fight is not your fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so he went ahead and did it anyway. So again, you speak to his principles, you speak to his ethics, you speak to what kind of a stand-up guy he is. And again, I still make the comparison back to, Muhammad Ali. You and I were in our text exchange in preparation to talk about Moore as the GOAT. I was talking to you and I was asking you about some of the acolytes and some of the peers really that came along, right around the time he was working on Swamp Thing, and then into Watchmen, and then into other things, and then some of the people who came after that, and we named a few names. But I wanted to get your take, just some of the people that you would consider to be, I call them the sons of Alan Moore.
That sounds like an old John Wayne Western. The Sons of Alan Moore, Sunday on TBS.
On TBS.
But yeah, man. Number one for me would be Grant Morrison. Actually, I'm gonna say a tie for number one would be Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman.
Okay.
Because with Gaiman, you have that literary side of Moore, the love of language and prose that they put into, their comics work, you know what I'm saying? And somehow being able to get, top flight artists who are able to interpret that into these, great, comic book stories. And I say Grant Morrison is because Morrison, while he can do some of that, same type of literary bent that Gaiman does, I think Morrison represents kind of that more populist bent of Moore. The stuff with taking like established IPs and turning them on their ear and somehow getting you to think differently about those characters, like finding kernels within the characterization that haven't been exploited, or rather haven't been shown yet or showcased, to make you think, wow, why hasn't anyone thought about that before with that character? Now I see the character in a whole new light, and being able to do something with the character so perhaps not totally revolutionary, but in such a popular manner that it spotlights that character and gives new life to it. And so thus other creators following in his wake are like, okay, we're going to take what he did and maybe build upon it, maybe not, but at least he's put that possibility out there. And so I think Morrison represents that as well. So it's those two sides of Moore that, are seemingly represented perhaps in those two creators, those two writers for sure.
Yeah. And I was thinking about like Peter Milligan and I think you even mentioned you were talking Warren Ellis and Garth Ennis a little bit too.
Sure. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As far as that goes, let's end it on a fun note, man.
Okay. All right.
I just thought about this while we were talking. So, Alan Moore came along in the 80s and really like the mid 80s and then moving forward. So there are a generation of artists who worked in comics prior to that that he never got to collaborate with. So I was trying to think like in a fun way, okay, what if Marvelman was being done at an earlier time in the 70s or the 60s? What if Steve Ditko drew Marvelman?
Man, that shit would be mind blowing. That man, bruh.
Dog.
Bruh.
Sir, what if somebody like Neil Adams actually drew Watchmen?
Oh man, are you kidding, man? Shoot, man.
What if Bernie Wrightson did V for Vendetta?
Man, bruh. I know it's
over.
Yeah. What if Bernie Wrightson did the Swamp Thing that Alan Moore wrote? Man.
Oh.
Brother. Bro.
Okay, here would be the better one then. Okay, Bernie Wrightson does the Swamp Thing. Alex Toth does V for Vendetta.
Ooh. Ooh. Boy. Ooh. Yo.
Ooh, I'm in here doing the church dance, yo. Hold my mule. Sir, I'm about to get slain in the Holy Ghost.
Bruh. I mean, God, the possibilities just, man. And you know, speaking to that, you know, he holds such prestige within the industry that you had people, even if it was an 8-page story, they would talk about, man, I got the chance to work on an Alan Moore story. You know, like contemporary artists, you know, when he was still doing stuff, they're like, man, I can't believe it was just 8 pages, but I got a chance to work on an Alan Moore script, you know?
Yeah.
For him to, you know, have that type of prestige attached to his work and to be able to attract that in these top flight artists, you know what I'm saying? You could only imagine, you know, working with like those masters back in the past like that. The mind boggles, sir. The mind boggles, yo.
Sir, I got a couple more.
All right.
I'm in my beautiful mind thing now, yo. I'm seeing the numbers, yo.
They're coming at you, yeah.
Yeah, yo. And as much as I adore Brian Bolland,
okay.
What if Jim Aparo did the Killing Joke?
Bro, well. Man, my face melting like Tote and Raiders, yo.
Ooh, or I'm trying to think of something good for like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Somebody good from back in the day. Maybe like a Carmine Infantino or I'm trying to think.
Man. You know who would have been crazy? Who would have been, which would just been like this crazy dream world pairing, yo? Put somebody like a Jorge Safino with Alan Moore on something like that.
Yeah.
Bruh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, yo.
I feel that, man. I feel that joint like in the pit of my stomach, man. Just like, damn.
What about starstruck heavy metal era Mike Coluto on Promethea?
Yeah.
You know, or I'm trying to think of somebody good for From Hell. Mm-hmm. Somebody with a good horror bent. We've already talked about Bernie Wrightson. We already got him on Swamp Thing. We keeping him on the old favorite. Somebody good for From Hell. Richard Corbin?
Man, that would have been crazy. Damn. Woo. Man, that shit would have challenged Corbin like none other. You know what I mean?
Yo. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's just remarkable. I mean, and you know, the common factor in all of this, again, is just that you already know that it's Alan Moore, so you already know the script is like, you know, locked tight.
Yeah.
It's in there.
Yeah.
all you gotta do is just hand the baby to the babysitter, like, here, take care of my baby. You know what I'm saying? You just gotta find the right babysitter to nurture that baby, grow it into a into a healthy young child and watch it grow up and like, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I mean, even to some extent, yo, you have to say, like, he gave it to the artists and all of those artists that he worked with, Lloyd and Leach and
Gibbons
and Kevin O'Neill. Just they're all terrific artists. Really, all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But he just basically said, okay, here, I'm giving it to you. All you got to do is just not mess it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All you got to do is just not mess it up. And that's another testament to how powerful the works were. Think about how different all those artists are, their approaches are, their sensibilities, you know, what they do well versus what they don't do well. And they all succeeded. It's almost like he's like Jordan, where he makes Pippen better. He makes Rodman better just by his mere presence. You're on the team with me, you're going to rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
Whew, man, bruh, now I want to read all that shit all over again, man.
All them shits, yo. Fish and grits and all them pimp shits, yo.
That concludes this episode of Sidebar Forever, hosted by Dwight Clark, Swain Hunt, and Adrian Johnson. You can find us online at sidebarforever.com. Any emails or questions can be directed to us at sidebarforever@gmail.com. And also, subscribe to us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram.